Welcome to Click Moments, where the right information at the right time is a portal from where you are to where you want to be. And I'm your host, Beth Orr. And today we have Flamy Grant that's going to be with us. And your birth name is Matthew Blake, right? And so
Yes,
people
it
might know
is.
you as Matthew. People might know you as Flamy Grant. I actually met you as Flamy Grant
Hmm.
because I go to Jubilee, the spiritual community here in Asheville, North Carolina, and I participate online. And I had the wonderful benefit of being able to hear Flamy Grant do the message. And I guess it was about what, 4 weeks ago that you were here?
It probably was around that time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so around 4 weeks ago that you gave the message, and truth be told, I had never heard of you before, and all I knew is in that moment, I was like, wow, here is an individual who has a really powerful message, who is being, and I'm an authenticity and intuition guiding coach. So for me, watching people be uniquely themselves is so important to me. And what I heard from you in that message was somebody who was genuine, who was speaking from their heart, who had a really powerful message. And so I just knew that I wanted to talk to you more. So what I'm getting ready to share with you is what I've learned about you through Google. But I wanted to start with who I saw you to be, not knowing anything about you, and that's what got
Wow.
me interested in having.
That's such an honor. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I love that drag can be something that reveals authentic parts of ourselves, right? Because drag is considered to be and is such a uh you know a character, a facade, not real, right? Like we look at drag and we think, oh, that's not real. And I love that authenticity can still come from something, from an art form that is so widely considered to be um maybe inauthentic or
Mm,
unreal.
yeah, thank you for that perspective because um, I solely saw it as authentically a part of who you were. So I appreciate that reflection on that because it certainly is. It always depends the perspective of the person who's observing, right?
True.
But for me, that's how I saw you. So just for those people that are listening in and that are not aware of Flamy Grant, you've been married to your husband Chris for 4 years now, right?
Yes, yeah, just
four
over four.
years.
Mhm.
You were born in Asheville, which we both live in Asheville or in the area, and but you moved away after a period of time. You were away, and you just recently moved back into the area this year in
Yes.
2023. Your song "Good Day," which is by the way amazing.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, it got which is from your LP Bible Belt Baby hit #1 on Apple Music recently.
Very briefly,
And
specifically on the Christian charts, but yes,
okay, great.
very
And
briefly it was there.
yeah, and I didn't mention briefly because I'll be honest with you, to me, I was like, you got there. It's beautiful, right? It doesn't
We did
matter
get
how
there. We did
brief
get there.
you
Yeah.
got there, right? And then congratulations. I saw that you had just met your goal of reaching $30,000 for your new album, which is
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful. And if I'm not mistaken, you're up to like 42,000 of the 30,000.
We're still raising. We hit the goal in, I think, just over 2 days, which,
Yeah.
it's a 30-day campaign, and I've done a few Kickstarters, as an artist in my life. I've
Yeah.
done a few of these, and they've always been, kind of nail biters, kind of clawing your way to the goal. And this is the first time I've experienced anything like this, where the enthusiasm behind the
Mm,
project just like overwhelmed the goal immediately. And it's such a gift, because I feel like I got a month of my life back, a month that I
right.
don't have to go fundraising so hard. So it's
Yes.
magic.
Yeah. So can we just start there? Um, you said that you've had several Kickstarters in your career, and you're actually like you're at this space that you're being really wrapped around, it feels like right now. Although that you do have some people that are giving you some negative press. It's still press, right? Um, but you're also being really loved and wrapped around by a lot of people right now. So you've been given
Yeah.
this opportunity to be seen and known by people that need to know you and hear your message. So what's that been like for you at this particular juncture in your career and what you're doing?
It's it's otherworldly in so many ways, because I think, um, as a queer person, I think it's a pretty common experience for queer people to spend so much of our energy and so much of our time, um, here trying to be understood and trying to be known, right? And trying to figure out how to tell our story in ways that, um, doesn't uh, doesn't trigger the kind of, um, negative feedback that we're so used to getting. Well, depending on where you grow up, obviously. I come from even fundamental evangelicalism, so there are my husband grew up in a family that did not have strong religious ties and certainly did not have any kind of fundamental ideologies. So he had a different experience growing up and was loved and embraced for who he was almost from the get-go.
Mm,
But a lot of us, still come up in those spaces. And just in general, America can be a place that's hard to be queer. Um, and so it is a radically different experience, I think, at least on the scale, right?
mhm,
The scale of this thing that's been happening this year for me is new. To see that, I love that word, wrapping, actually. I do feel enveloped somewhat,
mm,
by people who are enthusiastic about my art and the message I'm bringing, and want to see that message, like they want to be a part of helping to spread that message, right? And so
yes.
that's a cool, it's, I mean, a gift is the only way I can talk about it. It's just a gift. It's really lovely.
Yeah. And I think that you're really touching the hearts of people who haven't necessarily had a language for the kind of pain that they've been experiencing, the pain that they've been experiencing, feeling disconnected from like if we've grown up in a church or we've grown up in any kind of spiritual community, and most of us at my age have grown up in religious communities, and there is so much pain to feel like we're not accepted or embraced and not even tolerated,
Mm.
by those communities. And it feels to me like some of your following, and I would be interested in you've just been on the road and traveling a lot, and I would be interested in not presuming who your following is, but you sharing with me who you found, besides besides who I am and who I presume is somebody who's interested in you because of who I am and what interests me. I would be interested in the people that you found that have really resonated with your message and your lyrics and your music as you've been on the road.
Yeah, it's surprising, often, the folks who I end up kind of having connections with after shows and things like that. And it's, you know, I tend to make my music specifically with queer people in mind, and specifically with, queer folks who grow up in situations similar to mine, high demand religion and oppressive spaces and things like that. So, um, that's at least kind of the who's at the forefront
Mm,
when I'm writing songs and when I'm performing and looking out at audiences. I'm kind of, I feel like I'm looking for the queer folks and trying to connect with the queer folks.
yeah.
But afterwards, oftentimes the conversations will be with, um I just, I, the straight white man, for for lack of the straight cis
Mm,
white guy, for lack of a better term. It's funny how often, he ends up being the one to come up and say, I didn't know what to expect, or I was like, well, we've got a
mm,
drag queen, singer, songwriter. And I'm often like also in spaces that are not drag spaces, right? Their music spaces, their concert halls, their music venues, um, the folk music scene, the Christian music scene, and so you know, I'm many times I'm people's first up close experience with a drag artist, drag performer, and I'm not your typical. I'm not maybe the most. I don't typify drag in I think the way most people tend to think of it, because we have RuPaul's Drag Race and very popular forms of drag. Um, I am a singer songwriter who is also a drag queen. I'm just those two things together, and so um, my art is not all. I can lip sync and I do from time to time perform in traditional drag shows, but that's just not my primary art. My art is sharing my songs while in drag, and so it's just interesting to like kind of be that gateway uh gateway into drag for a lot of people, and then to connect with folks who they're not necessarily the people I'm writing the songs for, and then they end up being the ones who seem to experience some of the biggest impact from my music and from my art, which is again an honor to just watch how there's just alchemy and magic in the
Mm,
creative process, right? Like we just by
mhm.
sharing ourselves, by being authentically ourselves, by artfully telling our stories, um, we find people find the universal in the specific, right? Like the the
Mhm.
the difficulty of being yourself, becoming yourself, being authentic and true to yourself, which is typified in my story and in drag and in all of it. That's something that resonates with everyone, no
Mhm.
matter who you are, no matter whether you are able to present in the world in the way the world also sees you or not.
Right.
So yeah, it's really cool. It's it's surprising, and my audiences do tend to be, I think, like my age and older. So I'm
Mhm.
not, as much as I would love to be like hip with the Gen Z and like that kind of thing. Like it's people who I think are a little bit further along in life and like evaluating uh,
Mm.
evaluating the first part of their life, or the first or second parts of their life, and like looking at how they want to change moving forward. It seems like those are the folks that tend to resonate most with my stuff.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, I mean, I've identified as being a lesbian since I was 16, and but I've certainly Asheville's the first place 2 years ago when I moved here. I grew up in Missouri. I went to Tampa, Florida for 10 years. And
Mm,
then more recently, I moved to Asheville during the pandemic. And I moved here because I needed to create a community and find a space that felt like home, that I
mhm,
didn't have to just be tolerated, but that I
mhm,
actually felt embraced. Like you said, that word, that I was part of the community because of like it wasn't any there wasn't any like specifier that's like, oh, you happen to be a lesbian and so we're no, 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 no. Like I'm a human being who gets to be part of this community and you see me for who I am, right? So this is the first place I've actually lived that feels like a home that I feel embraced and accepted for who I am, right?
that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm wondering a couple of things. You left here and you grew up here, and you left and now you're back. So I'm aware that this space may not have always been that for you, right?
Correct.
So you've been also like it's not unusual for us to try to find home, with whatever that means. And our authenticity is a part of that. We can't find home until we're okay and comfortable within our own skin, which is our home here, right? Like we're the
Yes.
home.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm just kind of wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of talking about that evolution for you in
Yeah.
finding that.
Um, it's funny because yeah, people look at Asheville now and think of a blue dot in a purplish state and just a really progressive place, and a place that just has a lot of diversity in terms of uh, how people think, and it's just open, like an open place, right? And I think Asheville's kind of always had an element of that, even when I was growing up. It's just that I didn't really grow up in Asheville.
Mm,
I geographically, yes, but my world much more closely resembles. I mean, it's why I named the album Bible Belt Baby. It much more closely resembled evangelical subculture and um, rural um, community, I think.
mhm,
So I was part of the community that we grew up in. The church community was called Plymouth Brethren, or just they're more frequently known as like gospel chapels or Bible chapels. If you see them out in the wild, that's usually what they're called. And so it's just a really on the spectrum. It's far into the like very literal interpretation of the Bible, very patriarchal, very like women were not permitted to speak in our church services growing up, had to cover their hair, that kind of thing. So not full um it's people I start describing and people start pulling from other traditions. They're like, oh, like Mennonites, or oh, like Amish, and I'm like, yes and no. Like there's elements that are in there, but it's kind of its own weird brand of cult, and and I use that
mhm,
word really intentionally.
right,
Um, um, the the degree to which you are compelled to stay and fall in line with the practices and beliefs of the body. Um, there's a lot of effort that goes into ensuring people conform, and especially as a kid growing up in that,
mhm,
ensuring that you conform and become what is expected for
mhm,
you. And the tactics that are used are the same as anywhere: shame and fear, and those manipulative tools, um,
right,
uh, especially leaning hard into the the tools of religion, and specifically like what afterlife is going to look like for you, and but not even just the afterlife. I had a distinct fear growing up of becoming someone who might end up in a gutter with a needle in my arm. So I had a a vision of life outside of our church that was painted for me, and it was one of despair.
yeah,
So I I was really compelled. And I was also the firstborn, and so wanted to please, and all of everything that comes with kind of being that the firstborn. And so I don't really feel like I grew up in Nashville. I feel like I grew up in
mm,
you know a near cult. And yeah, so I did have to get away. And
yeah,
it started in college, and I just went just a hop, skip, and a jump to Bristol, Tennessee, to King College, and for a couple years there. And that was the first place I encountered. Well, maybe not the first, because I did go to a Christian school here in town, and there I would interact with people from other denominations. So I knew that, like, even the Christian world was very fractured, and um, people believed differently while still believing the same things. So I knew about that,
mhm,
but I still thought that our church was the benevolently gifted group of people who had like ultimate truth, right? Like
right,
we looked down on Catholics for sure. We even kind of looked down on some of the other denominations, like, oh, Baptists are almost there, but they're missing the mark on a few key things. So there was just a lot of like self-righteousness and
mhm,
how our posture growing up. And but then, yeah, college, started to meet people um, who didn't fit my understanding of what was right or holy or good, and yet, found my own beliefs about that being challenged, because these people were right and holy and good,
Mm,
and in some ways more so than me, but right because they were more connected to themselves. And um, so yeah, just a very long journey deep into my 20s before I finally came out. I did have to. I moved across the country, first to Reno, Nevada, and then to San Diego, California, where I moved to
okay.
start a church. And um, just about a decade of coming to terms with the my own faith, with my own sexual identity, and um, finally ending up in what people would call like progressive Christian spaces,
Okay.
and um, doing what is now called deconstruction. Like that's kind of the hashtag, the popular term online for like evaluating your inherited beliefs,
Mhm.
uh, and dismantling them a little bit. But for me, I just felt like apostasy. I felt like I was like doing the thing that I had always been taught I shouldn't do, which was to question and think critically, and came to conclusions that were different than what I had been raised to believe. So
Mhm.
yeah, I do feel like I like home. For the first place I ever felt like home was in San Diego, and um, coming back here was a it was a decision. It was one
Mhm.
we weighed for about a year trying to decide if that was the right course for us, and there are so many reasons why we ended up choosing to do it. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like you first have to be at home here in this
Yeah.
body, and your spirit has to know that you have its back, right? Like that that you have
Mhm.
your own back. And so I think without that, like moving back here would probably be a disaster. But
Right.
uh, with that, I think it's actually changes the game
Yeah.
immensely. So
I mean, there's so many people, that are deconstructing right now, right? Their faith, what they've been handed. I mean, church numbers are down, just because it doesn't resonate. A lot of things didn't resonate for people anymore. And I don't know about you, but I definitely felt early on there were so many rules that I knew by the time I was 17, I was pretty sure I was going to hell
yep.
because there was too many rules. Like I couldn't stay on top of them and have hormones. And so and I say this, I smile, but it wasn't funny to be 17 years old and to feel like you're a child of God, and that you might be going to hell, and
Hmm.
not just might, but probably are. So it's interesting. I remember reading that, and I don't know how many people go to Christian bookstores anymore, but you and I've been in a Christian bookstore. I actually went to my first Christian bookstore in Columbia, Missouri, because when I was 16. Now, here's the thing: in my church, one thing I will give them is that they didn't talk against homosexuality. We just didn't talk about it at all.
Same,
Really.
same.
Interesting. So,
Hmm.
in this culture of silence, which there's a lot of things that get lumped into the culture of silence, which the belief is, I believe, to keep us in line, right? And it goes back to that shame. But the first time I heard somebody talk about homosexuality and kind of intimated what it meant, I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting. I haven't heard about that. Like that resonates with me." So I went to the Christian bookstore and I found a book, because this is pre, smartphones and looking up stuff.
Oh yeah.
So I had to search, and the only place I knew, because I trusted my faith, and what I found was a book that was called Overcoming Homosexuality.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I bought it anyway because I needed a starting place.
Hmm.
I didn't know what this meant, but I knew it resonated with me, right? So then we're conflicted because, what do you mean? Like, this resonates with me, and I belong to this whole thing, whatever this is, but yet I have to not be a huge part of who I am, right? So since I already thought I was going to hell, I pulled away from the church because I didn't feel like I belonged, for a long period of time. But I never turned away from my spirituality. I was just I
Mm,
entered a season of anger and frustration why I had been set up in these circumstances, and I felt like I'd been dealt a rough hand, right?
yeah, absolutely.
So does any of that resonate with kind of like I'm always interested like how other people who don't feel like they fall in line and are in these silent places where we're supposed to be given the messages that we need to get closer to whatever the divine is,
Right.
but we're alienated and kind of pushed away from.
Yeah. I love hearing it too. I love hearing how other people navigated those spaces. And you and I chose different paths. I'm always impressed and in awe of folks who had the enough of a sense of self to know that, like, either it was, this is damaging for you, or that there was part of you that needed to extract yourself, right? Like it was a,
Mhm.
a rescue mission
Yeah.
for yourself in some way. For reasons, I will probably be talking through in therapy for a while, did not have that wherewithal. I did not have that.
Mm.
um I wasn't on my side. I was on the side of um what I perceived to be truth, what I thought was what I had been handed as truth.
Yeah.
So I leaned hard into the I can't remember what book I found, but similar to you, I found books, and
Mhm.
they had titles like that, overcoming homosexuality, or um gosh, I wish I could remember what book it is, but I'm looking around like I've got it in the
Yeah,
room.
right, like it's
I
just set on
definitely
your
don't.
bookshelf.
Can you imagine?
I keep it in my archives.
Just in case I need to reference it. Um, anyway, I found those programs, I found those books, and I leaned into them
Mm.
because I was so scared of, again, the consequences, my fear of kind of losing my space, my place in that world, my fear of what awaited me, which I thought was just a life of destruction or no life at all, maybe
Right.
just death, immediate death. Um, and by the way, yeah, our church was very similar. I don't remember homosexuality ever being preached about from the pulpit or anything like that. It just was this taboo, like, no, no, like we just don't acknowledge it.
Mhm.
And so I was so protected, quote unquote, from encountering queerness and so many other things too, but queerness being in the list, that I just didn't know. I didn't know what it
Yeah.
was, didn't know it existed. I just knew, like, I was weird, right? Like I knew I had bizarre um proclivities.
Yes.
and um I did, obviously, by probably late middle school, high school, like, figure out things for myself, and was doing that research for myself on the down low. I was
Mhm.
also getting called the F word, by my peers and things like that, because they sensed it even if I didn't know what it was.
Mm.
So uh I tried, I masked, I did everything I could. I enrolled myself at the age of, what, 20 or 19, enrolled myself in conversion therapy through Exodus International.
Yeah.
I followed that program for a solid 5 years. I really thought that I had to overcome homosexuality in order to be acceptable to God, acceptable to the church, maintain my place in that world. So just a really different path than my brother, who is also queer, falls more in line with how you handled it. And I've just always been so inspired to hear those stories, because I'm just
Mm.
like, wow, I just didn't have the wherewithal to pursue that for myself. I do
Mhm.
now, obviously, and
Obviously, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
hard earned now, and that's why I think I go so hard, um, specifically against evangelicalism, and why drag is my tool, and why, like, extreme queerness, if you will, like
Mhm.
is in my arsenal to like combat that because I know from experience that not everybody has the gumption to get up and leave when they should. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
or not even the gumption, but just like the the knowledge, like enough knowledge. Like I just didn't know.
It's interesting though because I don't know I don't necessarily see it like you're seeing it as something that, oh, I'm like, you maybe wish that you had that as, like, something that you would have responded in that way, but I honestly just didn't know how else to handle it. To me, it felt like an abandonment, but it
Mm,
felt like I was so abandoned by whatever was happening out
mm,
here, and I felt so much distrust for not like, I was a 3 time a week churcher, I was doing all the good girl stuff, I was doing everything I was supposed to do, but yet bad stuff happened to me, and not just
mm,
that wasn't on the list of the bad stuff that happened to me. So then that was super confusing when I was like, "Ooh, all these bad things happened to me when I was doing the good girl stuff."
right.
And this doesn't feel like I was excited when I found out there was such a thing as homosexuality. It was like, "Oh my gosh, there's another way." I run home, I share with my family, "Hey, there's this thing that nobody's been talking about. By the way, I think I'm it." And then everybody's reaction is like,
Mm,
and I was like, "Oh, hang on, backtrack. Whoa, 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 whoa." So for me, my response was just my experience of it hurt so much to be so
mm,
confused by the rules that didn't make sense to me, and neither time did I feel particularly protected. So for me, I was like, it was a protective measure to be like, "I'm out." And being a woman in that environment, I already felt subservient.
mm,
So I was like, if I'm gonna go to hell and I'm not gonna have a relationship with God anyway,
mm,
there's no redeeming me. That wasn't even in my mind. I do believe that if I had had any inclination that I could have been redeemed, I probably would have made your decision and tried to, but it
mm.
never even occurred to me that I had
Wow.
a shot.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That that is interesting because yeah, I definitely felt like there was a path back to rightness for me, and I'm using air quotes. I don't know. This is just an audio podcast, right?
No, it's
Or do
video.
we do it's video too? Okay.
Mhm.
If we do audio, just know I'm using air quotes when I say rightness.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
uh, um, I believed that, and I guess because of probably some of the literature I found, like I I knew that it wasn't. I learned pretty early that I wasn't unique, right? Like I knew that other people had this struggle, and I encountered folks who claimed to have overcome, right? So I had, at least on the surface, or at least initially, like I had people in my Exodus small group that I went to who were like, "Oh yeah, I'm healed. God saved me from homosexuality." Um, which, after a few months of spending time with that person became, well, like, yeah, I'm still attracted to men. I just make the choice. And I'm like, well, that's different. That's a different thing than being redeemed and saved from homosexuality. Like, I wanted the full change. I
Yes.
wanted to be attracted to women. I wanted all of that to feel natural and normal to me when it didn't. And that's what I was in pursuit of for so long. Um, and it just took time to realize that I was being so lied to,
Mm,
that's not a thing that happens,
mhm.
I've never
Yeah.
still never met a person uh who identifies as ex-gay or anything like that who will, when you drill down to the nitty-gritty, will say, "Oh yeah, no, I have zero attraction to the same sex anymore." Like that's just not, I've never met that person.
Right.
And so And obviously that did not happen for me after 5 years in that program. I, it just I think I was just so ready to believe what I had been handed.
Mhm.
Um, Again, probably out of like, that was probably created in me, indoctrinated or groomed into me, if you will, to borrow some
Yes.
of their language. Um, Excuse me. Uh, because the alternative was so terrifying, the
Mhm.
the idea of eternal torture. I mean, like, that's what a horrifying thing to present to a child.
Right.
Um, and also what a horrifying thing to like willingly worship a God who chooses that or allows that or creates that or like that possibility for that God's creations. Like I just, the further away from it I get, the more bonkers it all feels to me because I'm just like,
Yeah.
can y'all hear yourselves? Like, you are willingly prostrate before a deity that would burn you up for the slightest infraction. I can love people better than that. If
Right.
if I'm capable of loving someone better than that, how is that thing God? Like, if if God is, and God is love, then God has to love better than me, right? Like, otherwise I'm God. Like,
Yeah. Right.
so I don't know. I'm obviously going off on a tangent here, a soapbox here, but because I don't even remember what question I'm answering, but there
That's
you go.
okay. I was down that rabbit hole with you because it is true. Like, as a God is love, I think what you're speaking to is we're not the only ones who have been fed this belief system that actually keeps us separate from each other, right? Like
Mm,
what I do
mhm,
believe now, for me personally, and I know that everybody has their own personal beliefs, but I believe that whatever we're all getting closer to, that it's a oneness, and we come from that original source,
mm,
and what we've chosen in these bodies is for some reason to see our separateness as opposed to our what's similar in us and what's alike in us, and it's just a choice to see what aligns versus what separates us, and instead of looking at our
yes.
unique differences as
Mm,
beautiful, like a beautiful tapestry, which is also a choice, there is fear. And I understand, like, to me, there's also this group of people that I grew up with, which, by the way, I love those individuals I grew up going to church with. They were good people, but they were also a fit in the system, so they didn't need to learn anything different because they actually fit within
yes.
what was being shared.
Yep.
So it didn't rub up against anything. There wasn't any hell. It's not a big deal to talk about hell if I'm not going there.
Yep. I have often wondered, if it weren't for my queerness, would I be just another cog in that machine, because I was great at it. I was
Mhm,
so good at being an evangelical Christian. I excelled
mhm.
at it. I literally won the high school award my senior year for it. It's called the Citizenship Award. I went to a
Okay.
Christian school, but it was essentially best Christian. Like, that was the that was what it described. It's
Oh,
just
wow.
like the person of highest moral character, of, like that kind of thing. Like, I won that
Yeah.
award. I was the chaplain my senior year of high school. I led worship in college, devos in college. I did ministry teams in like, I was all in on that shit, um and I was good at it. And I could have performed with the best of them except for my queerness. That was the thing that like ultimately forced me to reckon with all the things we've been talking about, and
Yeah.
how strange this belief system really is. And so I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that
Mhm.
I'm queer, because I just would hate to imagine the kind of persecutor I would be, the kind of oppressor I would be if I otherwise fit into that system so well. It,
Right.
it frightens me.
Can you talk about the evolution from where you were and making that shift from this evangelical background to questioning that not this to whatever your belief system spiritually is now? Can you kind of talk about that shift
Yeah, sure.
and what it took
So
to get there too? Like what was
yeah.
happening inside you?
So I talked about that, like kind of my decade long process of coming out and questioning my all my inherited beliefs. When I kind of got to the end of that decade, I was left with the question, well, like, what do I believe now? If I no longer believe all those things that I
Mm,
staked my, hung my hat on for so long, what do I believe? And so my way, I'm very much an external processor, and I don't know how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking until I can talk about it with another human, right? So my way of doing that was to start a podcast called Heathen,
mhm,
back in 2017, and I was really just trying to answer that question: what do I believe now? And I sat down
mm,
with, you know, initially it was just friends, just calling up friends who I knew had gone through similar changes or shifts in their perspectives and their faith, and talking with them about, like, how did you do it? Like, do you still go to church? Like, what do you believe? What does your spirituality look like? What does your spiritual practice look like? And um honestly, it was just through those conversations where I think I just, like, learned to accept that spirituality is such an individual. I mean, there's a communal aspect to spirituality, and I think that we can derive great benefit and pleasure and lots of good things from doing spirituality within community. But at the same time, everybody just had their own way, right? Their own
right.
very specialized, personalized, individual way of um, engaging with the divine in them or around them. Even that, like, people would talk about it differently. And so I ended up um, kind of cherry picking, which is, evangelicals' favorite word to accuse
Mhm.
accuse people of, cherry picking from, like, all these people I had talked to, and just I was like, I like that part of your spiritual practice, and I like that you do this, and I want to try yoga, and I want to, like, enter into, like, past life regression experiences and things like that, and just trying things until I found things that felt like they were helpful to me. Um,
Yeah.
so I think the biggest shift for me has been in um, the way I think, like, growing up, being right was the most important thing,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
Being correct and having right theology and knowing all the answers, um, because the stakes were so high, right? And that's
Yes.
it really was life and death. And if you don't have the right answers when God asks, like, unfortunately, you're out of luck. So
Yeah.
it's a shift from prioritizing rightness and correctness and capital T truth, to, well, honestly, it's just like a familiarity and a comfort with uncertainty, not, just kind of the opposite, not needing to be right, being okay with not having answers, acknowledging that beliefs are never true by definition, right? Because it's a belief, it's an unprovable thing that we have chosen to
Mm,
put stock in, put
right.
trust in.
Yeah.
So it can't be true, it can't also be true. If it were true in a human sense, we would be able to know that, we would be able to, like, scientifically observe it, that kind of thing. So just those little shifts in thinking, I think, were profound and helpful for me.
Mhm.
um yeah, just that comfort level with
Yeah.
uncertainty, and also prioritizing, honestly, joy and happiness over rightness as well.
Yeah.
um because if you do get to that place where you acknowledge that a belief is a belief and not a truth, then I don't know, it kind of loses. Well, it does. It loses so much of the power that it held over your life, um, because you could be wrong, and you're okay with that, right? Like I'm okay with the fact that I don't know what the afterlife is actually going to look like, and but what I do know is right now, and my experience right now, and how I feel when I'm in community with people, and when I treat people a certain way, and when I'm treated a certain way. Like those things give me actual data that I can
Yes.
respond to,
Right.
and um so that becomes honestly joy, and the pursuit of happiness and all of that kind of becomes the guiding compass for my spirituality, and what I hope for what I hope for other people as well, as I interact with folks. Like I want to bring joy. I want them to feel good
Yes.
interacting with me. Um I want to minimize suffering, and um expand, yeah, joy and connection, and
Hmm.
things that make life worth living.
It's beautiful. Kind of brings me to what you're describing. You said cherry pick is the term that people use, but to me, all I heard was, well, what you're describing is what resonated with you.
Yes, yes.
And what resonates with us to me is what most of my work is about, which is discovering our intuition, connecting with our
Mm,
intuition,
my
right?
favorite word.
Intuition.
I love the word intuition.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Me too. Because to me, your intuition may tell you something than my intuition, but it gets to we're having the human experience of what's right for us. But instead of an outside entity telling me what's right for me, given my relationship with whatever's occurring,
Hmm.
to me, I describe intuition as it's like a two-way communication system hardwired within each of us that
Mm,
allows for us to communicate with whatever's happening in this world, right?
yeah.
And so it's gonna sound different or feel different to you than me. But when your intuition's speaking and you're living immense joy and you're giving joy and you're wanting to share joy and connect with people, you're bringing this divine life into the world in your own way, according to how your intuition told you. And when
Yes.
I do the same thing, if we're all just staying in our own lanes, but yet connecting and encouraging each other with what's coming out, that's where there's so much potential for joy in our world. Is as if there's this big view of what could it look like, as opposed to it's got to look just like this, and if it's not just like this, then bad things are going to happen to you.
Yeah.
But instead, there's so much life in following our unique intuitive nudge inside of us, what resonates,
Mm,
right?
preach.
I love it. So I heard a story and I'm really excited to ask you about this. So you describe, and I think it was with Good Day, where as a singer songwriter, you said you had had this conversation with a group of people and they were all having this kind of different experience with their relationship with traditional um, like churches, and on the cusp of that, on the other side of that, you kind of you said you blacked out, and you had this moment where you woke up to these lyrics, and when I heard that part of your story I was like, ooh, he was a they were a vessel, and they're describing this, something was like downloaded in it and its intuition feels part of that. So in your singer songwriting experience, like, can you kind of talk about like what happens when a song comes to you? You're describing like an artist taking something
Wow.
from the ethers, then it just is here.
Yeah, I feel so woefully inadequate talking about this. I will try. But
Okay.
I just finished listening to an audiobook called Saved by a Song by Mary Gaucher, who's
Okay.
a lesbian singer-songwriter, and just my newest hero. I've loved her for a long time, but I didn't I didn't really know her music intimately. And then just in the folk music world that I've gotten involved in over the past year, she's pretty revered. And so
Mm,
I've started getting, listening more to her music, and um have got had the chance to meet her now actually.
mm,
And her book, I I mean, I don't you don't have to be an artist, you don't have to be a songwriter to appreciate the wisdom that she delivers in that book. But it's all about the process of songwriting and the alchemy, the magic of it, the muse of it. But yeah, it's I mean, that song in particular, and a handful of other times I've felt um I mean, I tell that story and I do say I blacked out and then woke up and then the song was in front of me on the paper. And I say it that way partially to get a laugh. Um, but there is some, like, you know, there's a nugget of truth to that. Like, I did have a really formative, life changing, honestly, experience with this, like, queer small group that I went to that the night I wrote that song. And uh, it was, like, it was a moment where I had felt convicted of something in me that
mm,
probably needed a shift, a thinking in me that probably needed a shift, and how I saw it represented in this group of people, and wanting to be more like this group of people. So all of those things were happening internally, and then I went home and I sat down with my guitar, and yeah, it just came. The song just came in a way that, you know, I didn't have to work for. It felt like
mm.
a gift, and it felt like a gift both from whatever is there, right? The divine, the muse, whatever we want to, when we're able to get in that flow,
Yeah,
spiritually, it felt like a gift from that. And it also felt like a gift from that group of people specifically because they are words, in that song.
right.
Um,
Mm,
so I I wish that were a more frequent experience for me. Much more often, the reality of songwriting for me is, there's a little bit more labor to it. There's a little bit more,
mm,
um, uh, chasing the muse as opposed to just being visited by her,
mhm,
um, which is valid. And I think uh, a lot of artists, and even Mary Gaucher will talk about that in her book as well. A lot of artists have that experience of, like there's work to be done. Songwriting is not you're not just always going to be like hand delivered
yeah,
um, a perfect lyric, um, and so there's work to be done there. But it is nice when those moments happen. It's feels like the most sacred
yeah,
um, experiences that I feel like I've had.
right.
Certainly, well, yeah, no, probably among the most sacred experiences is that kind of a flow state, trance state. I don't know, just where
Yeah,
you kind of like you hear the song later and you're like, I genuinely don't remember coming up with that melody, or like it just, but there it is. Um,
yeah,
it's very cool. It's very cool.
yeah,
And
that's
it's why I wouldn't want to do anything else, but because when those moments do happen, oh, oof, magic.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's like, it's something special when that happens. You can feel it, right? You can feel
Yes.
it. You're also describing kind of what this whole show is about, click moments, where
Hmm.
in that moment with that group, you had a receptivity that when we're not so concrete and we're open and we're receptive, then we're allowing for something different to come through us. It's like if we can't receive something different in our lives if we don't do something different or if we're not open to seeing a different perspective. And so what you're illustrating and modeling is that when we are receptive, then we leave space for this type of really dramatic internal shift to happen,
Yes. Yeah.
right? That brings something rushing through us that it's almost like we were blocked before, right? And we like created some space for it. But then there's this, I think beautifully said, like, there's this labor also, which I always think about when it's when my craft is not as in flow, or as it's not as easy. There is something to just the devotion of showing up, right?
Yes,
Just
absolutely.
just being there, and continuing to be like in that space and devoted to what you're here to do. And I just want to say, um, I'm excited for the synergy that you have around you right now. I'm excited to see where the universe takes you with all
Mm,
of the support and the encouragement that is wrapping around you. Um, and I'm just really like I'm excited with to see this such a dramatic response to your ask of I know what that's like to ask people to believe in you and to
yeah.
fund something that you're working on, and to see so much support. I'm excited to see what you do with that,
Hmm.
and where you go as you're moving forward.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. There's, um, I mean, I'll just be super vulnerable right now and say, like, so I just got back last night from 2.5 weeks on the road, and I'm now looking at about 6 weeks of being mostly home. I've got a few, like a weekend here, weekend there, kind of thing. But it's I have a lot to do, right? Like I have a lot to get done before the year's out if I'm gonna, stay on track with my vision for what next year looks like, and
Mhm.
recording a new record and all of that. The record's not fully written
Yeah.
yet, so I've
Yeah.
raised what $42,000 for a record that is still up here,
Mhm.
or at least partially still up here or out there, if we want to talk about the muse that way. But
Yeah.
so like even today, I'm talking with you, and then I have one other podcast later today that I'm recording that I scheduled a while ago, and looking at my calendar this week, I opened it up and I was like, oh man, like I've got these podcasts, and that's the last thing I want to be doing right now. I want like,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it's that showing up piece because I didn't know what
Yes.
to expect today, and I didn't know what click moments was, and or what click moments were, and here we are having this like fantastic conversation that's feeding me, I hope, as much
Mm.
as it's hopefully inspiring and feeding the people listening. And
Yes.
like that's I needed that. I didn't, I
Mhm.
didn't know that I needed to kick off this next 6 weeks with like this conversation, but I needed it. I absolutely did. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
yeah, just you got to show up, and you got to be receptive and open, and honestly expect that, like, the universe, the divine, whatever word you need to use to ascribe to the mystical part of human existence,
Yeah.
um expecting that it wants us to have these moments, right? Like it wants us
Yes.
to feel uber connected to each other, and it wants
Mhm.
us to um thrive and be happy and have
Yes.
joy, and if we, I think, have that posture, and come with that expectation and do our work, then like I don't think there's any way it's not going to deliver for us.
That's right. Yeah, and I think it along those lines, I think it rises the road rises in unexpected ways and unexpected places. So
Hmm.
many times we're trying to control how it looks, and sometimes it's just in the showing up that unexpected ways open up for us, right? Unexpected ways open up for us, and I'm excited. Like I know there's been some, for you, you've um, there was some question as far as like even like with the Grammys, like the acknowledgement of here
Yeah.
you have this. Did I hear that you were shifted in the Grammys out of the contemporary Christian category to what category?
Best pop vocal.
Best pop vocal. So they chose to shift you. But what I'm hearing is what your heart is creating, whatever they want to call it, what your heart is creating is to the level of being in a Grammy category,
Mm,
right? Whatever they want to call it, and I'm sure you may have some different posture about that, but I just want to reflect to you that your music is the words and the lyrics are meaningful to a lot of people. You're probably only going to know a small number of people that it means something to. But when
Mm,
your work gets to that level where you're in that category, you're impacting people in a lot of ways. And even to the white cis male that you're talking about that comes up to you after a performance, you are literally talking about having an impact on like a human impact to somebody who didn't know what to expect. And now they have a new way, they were receptive.
mhm,
And you utilize that opportunity to shift somebody's heart in this world, which is going to change their interactions with other people,
mhm.
right? So it's not even just about that moment. It's about that the way that you're doing what you're doing is impacting people in some really tangible, important ways.
Wow. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, just want you to know that I see you and I think that you're doing amazing things. And like I said, I just can't wait for what happens for you. I have faith that you're going to whatever music is going to come um through you is going to be I believe that it is going to come through you and it's going to be exactly what it should.
Mm,
So
thank you so much. I appreciate
yeah.
that.
So before we end our time, is there anything that you want to share that we haven't talked about that kind of you got pinged with as we were talking that you're like, I put a pin in that. I want to come back to that before we end.
No, I think for me I just said the takeaway for me, which is like even to remind myself, show up fully
Yeah. Yeah.
to the things that you're doing and expect that just expect that the divine and the universe have something to offer you,
Yeah.
even in a
Beautiful.
conversation with a stranger that you know are now fortunate to know. So yeah,
Yeah. Thank
lovely.
you. Thank you so much. I knew that you had been, I'd been following you and I knew you were on the road and I knew this was a tiring time for you. So I just want to thank you for showing up and for just being yourself and being vulnerable and sharing. And I'm just so grateful to have had this conversation with you. So
Likewise.
thank
Thank
you.
you for making the time and inviting me. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
great. Okay, so a special thanks to Micah McKenzie, who did the incredible cover art for Click Moments. Thank you, Micah. And until next time, my friends, peace and light.
Do with these words what you will. It's time for us to be for real. You'll be stuck on the ground until you finally break the shell.